Good morning, folks, or afternoon, depending on where you happen to be, whether you're watching live or archived, and welcome to Nautel's Transmission Talk Tuesday series. We're going to do this as sort of a roundtable where we get a couple of panelists in and we'll talk about a few things locally, and then we're going to start bringing you in. You'll see me looking around as I look at various things on the screen. So if I'm not looking at you, I'm probably looking at the guy next to you or something like that. Anyway, our guests today, and today the topic is storm season. So the official North Atlantic hurricane season opened June 1st, yesterday. We are on our third name stormed already. Yeehaw, this should be a fun year. So we're talking a little bit about site preparation, the things we can talk about for getting ready for extreme weather events, whether it's a North Atlantic storm or with our guests today, might be a high mountain or snowstorm type situation. So our guests today are from EMF, Shane Toven, who has, over the course of a long and storied career, worked for companies such as in northern Minnesota with he's been with Minnesota Public Radio, Wyoming Public Radio, now with EMF K-Love. Good guy, good friend. He's even done a stint, Jane, on the dark side, didn't you, with tech support at one point?
I did. I worked tech support for a couple of different companies, so many of you out there may have talked to me in that capacity at one point or another. Very
cool. And then we've also got Jason Gorodetzer from iHeartMedia in Colorado. And Jason, you were mentioning that you're getting ready to become a house owner. Check to see if Jason's around. We've been having some audio issues too, so if we do cut out here and there, I apologize for that. We will uh-oh, I'm already getting questions and comments. We will do our best to get an archive version and keep it as cleaned up as we possibly can. There, is that Jason there?
I'm unmuted here. I was muted by an organizer, now unmuted. So anyway.
There you go.
Yes.
We'll blame Ed for that.
Okay. Okay. Anyway, yes, as I was saying, it's looking for a rent to own, possible owning. It's a weird economy, but the time has come, I think.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. And in your spare time, you do work a lot of fairly high altitude sites.
Yes, I do. I actually have quite a few. I actually have a couple of famous ones, such as Lookout Mountain in Denver, and of course Cheyenne Mountain in Colorado Springs. The one with the NORAD tracking people on the inside. So
the one
always interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. Always interesting to be. There's actually an outhouse there, and I always think to myself, is this where that crazy guy in North Korea has his missiles pointed? I'm just saying,
I'm not 100% sure I'd want to be able to find that one out with my Sears catalog in hand, so to speak.
Exactly.
So for those who are watching, we do have some folks with webcams. Jason's running off cell phone as he is in the process of running around house hunting and doing a bunch of things. So just some of us have cams, some of us don't, but we're all still here. Now, we do have a couple of housekeeping items. As always, we will be handling questions. We are going to try to do this as a round table. So you'll see on your screen, you've got the little raised hand waving icon. If you click on that, somebody will most likely, and I say most likely because it depends. I see my boss's boss and his boss and a few other bosses are in here. We may or may not unmute you, but we're going to have some fun. Now, the goal here is to try to share ideas and make this as much of a participatory event, like a real roundtable as we possibly can. So by all means, if you've got a thought, suggestion, comment, throw it out there, whether you do it as typed in the question section as shown on your screen, or whether you do it by clicking the hand raise and we unmute you and bring you into the conversation. So certainly feel free to go ahead and do that stuff. Now, the things we want to talk about in the process are things like, well, there we go. We're going to have a little discussion between me, Shane, and Jason just to kind of get you thinking. And then we want to do the roundtable discussion. Now, what I'm going to do is pop up a topic and we'll talk about ways we've solved those type of problems. And so this is where your folks' input is going to be huge. I mean, let us know, and I'll be doing my best. And I know Ed's in the background, and he'll be prompting me and probably cussing at me a little bit as he tries to herd the cats and keep us all in line. So by all means, let's have some fun. So here are the ideas of things we want to cover as we talk about site preparation. We want to talk a little bit about redundancy, because what happens when the backhoe drives through your fiber, or the STL antenna goes down, or. We want to talk a little bit about site hardening for folks in fire zones, for the high mountain guys with ice falling, for the coastal guys with high winds. And, I mean, if 200 miles an hour is considered a high wind, then at that point we may have a bigger issue, but that's beside the point. Personal safety, that's a big one for me and for Nautel in general. And so we'll talk a bit about that. And then personal comfort. Now, Shane, you've done high altitude and remote sites. You have one even now in Boise that's helicopter access a good chunk of the year, yeah?
Yeah, correct. I mean, during the wintertime, that site in particular, you can only get to it for a helicopter or a very, very long snowcat ride. So it is critical that you have the stuff that you need going up there. And ideally, you keep some stuff at the site too. I mean, that site is one where there's always water stored on site. There's a small selection of tools on site. There's a first aid kit. There's a number of things. And yes, there is enough room in the site to actually, hunker down if you absolutely had to. Might not be the most comfortable, because I don't think they've got anything in terms of a cot or any kind of sleeping bag or anything up there. But you can hunker down up there if you absolutely have to. So it's nice to be able to keep the site in such condition that you can actually do that on those more severe access sites if you have to.
Very cool. Okay, and so the reason I asked these two guys in particular to be the experts, subject matter experts, if you will. Both iHeart and EMF have got a pretty good history of having engineering that's geared for this sort of thing and sharing resources when need be. And that's something that we really need to focus on as much as we can. I mean, especially with the situation today, you hear a lot of "we're all in this together," but in radio, for the most part, on the engineering point, it's almost always been like that. You've always seen folks help, and that's a wonderful thing. Now, Jason, what do you guys do for backup access, like STL links, if you had a backhoe or something like that go through a line?
Okay, what we do is we have multiple links, both wireline and wireless, as well as iHeart has its own satellite delivered audio over IP system called SAT-L, in addition to everything we do locally. So anyway, for example, KOA, or a big 50 kilowatt AM. Some of you may have probably heard of it, probably not a lot of people, but anyway, over there we have 5 ways of getting audio to the site. We have a standard T1 interplex, which is a primary STL. We have T1 that comes over actually a Trango radio, which is a wireless IP system licensed 6 gigahertz. And in addition to that, we also have a 900 megahertz STL, standard analog as a backup. And in addition, we have an 8 kilohertz loop still from the phone line, old technology, but we still support it. And should all that fail, we have the corporate SAT-L system, which is a satellite-based IP system. We can send audio over it, get some internet access, whatever we need it to site, if necessary. And all my stations in Denver have, at least 3, 4, 5, levels of backup for audio.
Okay, so you've got multiple paths, multiple sources, and multiple ways of getting the gear from point A to point B. How do you switch back and forth?
Correct. As far as switching the audio goes, in the case of KOA, I have 3 transmitters. So what I do is I have 3 of the sources on the main transmitter, the T1 audio over the T1 audio from the telephone company, the T1 audio over the wireless microwave, as well as the 8 kilohertz telephone loop going into the main transmitter. The primary backup transmitter, which is also 50 kilowatts, is hardwired into the STL. So to put that on OK, I switch over to that backup transmitter, which also, by the way, has its own processor. So in case the processor takes a dive, again, I can get it on the air till I have a chance to get over to the site and fix it. And in addition to that, I can also throw on an oh crap 5 kilowatt backup from that site as well, should I need to. And then as far as the corporate SAT-L, which is a satellite delivery system, that can go onto any of those 3 transmitters. And should I have something happen really bad at the site, like, I don't know, a fire, or say maybe a transfer switch fails, I have an offsite backup for that station. It's actually diplexed onto at one of my other sites, at one of my other stations north of town, where I also have both a copper T1 and an RF T1 audio path to get to that as well. So my goal is to never go off the air, if I can help it. So
understood, and very good. Now, Shane, for you guys, it's a little trickier because you deal with much more remote sites, and so in a lot of cases, you're just running satellite audio and fewer options. But what do you do for the sites where it's considered to be more critical?
Right. So in our case, it's a little bit different. The way we operate is we simulcast across our entire network. So it's not it's not an STL in the traditional sense, although we do have some sites that actually do have an STL between a downlink and the actual transmitter site. But that's usually the exception rather than the norm. Typical configuration is just a KU link at the transmitter site, which feeds our rack. We get our audio via that KU link, and we also do our IP connectivity via that KU link using VSAT technology. So that's kind of the primary setup. As far as redundancies, we do have some sites that have terrestrial IP to them, sometimes in addition to VSAT, but often maybe just terrestrial IP plus maybe like an LTE backup or something like that, in addition to the satellite link for audio. So there are a number of possible permutations there that you might see at our sites. And some sites have, some markets have completely separate auxiliary sites. Some markets have just a backup transmitter at the same site, or maybe a backup transmitter and antenna at the same site. It really just does depend on the market and the situation. And some of these links do get rather complex. You start looking at markets like LA and New York, and yeah, those markets get kind of complex in terms of what they have for various permutations of audio paths and RF backup and all that fun stuff.
Yep. The cool thing is now with audio over IP and SNMP and things like that, if you can get an IP link, you've got a lot more options. And even with something as simple as like Max Connect, you can run for $60 or $70 a month, have a pretty viable backup path.
So in our case, we, as far as audio backups, we also have some sites where we have both a C-band and a KU band downlink, and those will back each other up. So in case rain fade or something on the KU, the C-band will kick in, or during sun outage season, same thing. And in addition to that, sometimes some of those sites actually have IP into them as well, so that we use the Pico receivers. A lot of you are probably familiar with the Pro 4 series, the Pro 1 series, and all of that fun stuff. A lot of networks have switched to those now. But they can actually switch between either of the two tuners and an IP backup. So that's yet another mechanism that we can use. Or we use, sometimes standalone codecs as well to feed some of these sites. Just an IP link sending audio over a pair of IP codecs.
I'm just going to throw it out here one more time. If anybody in the audience has any questions, comments, or any input they want to add, hit the hand raising. The one question I've seen so far is if we're recording this, and the short answer is yes, we are. The archive will be available. And by all means, like I say, any ideas you've got, throw it in there. This is meant to be as much a roundtable as we can get in a virtual forum. So we'll carry on from there. One of the other things that we wanted to talk about was site hardening, and this is just something I grabbed out of a YouTube video. Somebody throwing a freezing rain shield over their heat pump at their house, but it's really not something that, especially in cold weather country, that you laugh at too hard, because having ice come off a tower and punch through the roof of a building can make a heck of a mess. So again, Jason, that's something you guys deal with on a fairly regular basis, I guess.
That is correct. We have ice on the tower, and speaking of ice falling on things, and specifically personal safety, which we'll probably get to in a little bit, I have a rule that I think everybody should follow, or if you're new to cold weather country, pay attention to this. Always, 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 always wear a hard hat around your towers when they have any ice on them, especially if you have FM bays or any sort of antennas on the tower, or even an AM tower, because the ice will fall off and eventually clock you or whoever else is on the ground. And happened to me once very, very early in my career, and after that I started wearing a hard hat and never had the issue again.
It's like insurance. If you've got it, you won't need it. But
yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. This was luckily for me, this was a relatively short tower. It was early in my career. I was on a mountaintop in Western New York, and only fell from about 50 feet, hit my shoulder, but that told me, I got to get a hard hat. So anyway.
Yeah, I have one quick war story about ice at a site. We had an engineer who had his truck parked out at the site, and he was inside the building. He knew that there was ice on the tower. He knew that that things were getting kind of dangerous. Sure enough, just about the time he was just getting ready to leave the site, big chunk of ice comes down off the tower through the cap on the back of his truck, and he's like, "Let's go." So, yeah, it's definitely an issue that you need to take into consideration.
Yep. My current work vehicle actually has a couple of minor dents on it that it received when I was up at one of our sites in Wyoming, and it has a co-located FM and TV site, and ice came off the tower, and I got a teeny tiny dent in the trunk and one on the side of one of the doors from ice falling off the tower. Luckily, it didn't take any glass out, but it was very loud. So.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, I know I've seen a lot of sites with like crosshatch 2x4s or whatever on the roof just to break up any bigger ice chunks that happen to come down. One of the other things for the sunnier territory is sun shields. If you've got a translator in an outdoor enclosure, just having a metal sheet an inch or two on pillars above the roof will give you a barrier to break down the sun strength a little bit and cut down on heating inside the cabinet. So if you're air conditioning it, it'll save you a lot of grief too. Shane, you guys do a lot of more tropical locations as well. Is that something you use much for translators and stuff like that?
We do have some translators in outdoor cabinets, and yeah, you definitely want to try to keep them as cool as possible. If you can get them into a shadier area or put some kind of shield over top of them to shade it a little bit, great. The other thing that people don't necessarily think about with those types of outdoor cabinets is the humidity consideration. You really have to be careful about how you size the air conditioners inside of those, those outdoor enclosures as well. Because you could get into a case where, okay, everything's nice and cool and dry until you open the door. And then suddenly everything has a big layer of condensation on it, and you're kind of in a world of hurt.
Yeah, definitely everything is situational and controlled by the environment. Now, what about cable tie downs? And I picked cable tie downs because I ran into a site in Wisconsin once that had some straight line winds go through, and it was one of these cell towers where you had a solid wall of coax going up one side of the tower, and probably about 200 feet worth of black tie wraps had snapped in some straight line winds. So that was definitely entertaining.
Yeah, I don't want to pick on hams and two-way guys, present company accepted, but yeah, in wireless ISPs, I see this a lot on towers where they do make the proper mounting hardware for cables to make sure that they're secure. Tie wraps are great until they're not. Same with black tape. It's great until it's not. But I've lost count of the number of towers I've walked up to and seen cables just flapping in the breeze. And some of them are still miraculously working, but others are, obviously they've been severed just because they've been sitting there flapping so long, and nobody's obviously gone up there to just take care of it and clean things up. Maybe some of it's abandoned stuff, I don't know, but yeah, good reason to use the proper hardware on your cables, and quite frankly, keep the towers clean as much as you can, abandon hardware and cable.
Now, one comment, Ray Lewis has mentioned that he saw a recent webinar that said that 450 meg RPU band is now unlicensed, and wondering about using old Marty RPUs for backup STL. You guys have any thoughts on that?
Go ahead, Jason.
Sorry, Shane. You go ahead.
I was going to say, I hadn't honestly heard too much about that. I knew there were some changes in the 450 band, but I don't know that it would be, I'd have to look at the regs and see exactly whether or not using that as an oral STL would be permitted, maybe on a backup basis. But yeah, I would definitely dig into the regs a little more and take a closer look at that just to make sure that it's kosher.
Yeah, that is kind of my thoughts too as well. I haven't had a chance to dig into it, but I do have a ton of 450 gear because, believe it or not, in Denver, just because of congestion in the cell bands, the latency and stuff, our traffic reporters and even our news guys still make use of the especially the VH 144 is 150 megahertz as well as the 440 megahertz STLs, RPUs for a lot of things. In addition, we also have some IFB frequencies that we use as well in those bands that we're licensed for talkback. So,
yeah,
and the one thing I was wondering too is with the IFB, we usually have, for example, we actually have that KOA is actually licensed as a shortwave of at the 29 megahertz band, narrowband FM. If anybody wants an interesting DX target, speaking of you ham types. And anyway, I always wondered, in an emergency, the legality of just, just getting like a general coverage receiver with narrowband FM or a scanner and putting it right into my processor just as an emergency STL. Now with the new regs. So, yeah. What have you heard, Gene?
Well, and yeah, quite frankly, sometimes you do what you got to do to get it back on the air. I mean, bear in mind, using something like that is not going to give you. I mean, if you got an FM, you're not going to get full fidelity, but if you've got an AM or something, obviously it gets audio back on the air for you, one way or another. And
exactly. And this being an AM, I think I'd be okay. Narrowband FM feeding an AM temporarily, I think it'd be perfectly acceptable. So that's just my feeling. But anyway, especially talk format.
Very cool. And I mean, one of the other things, of course, flood control, building, I was going to say moats, but I guess dikes would be a better, or berms, whatever, around the transmitter site. I know there's one in Winnipeg on the Red River where there's a big enough berm around the transmitter building that you can't see it from outside. Now, all that said, and the Meadowlands in New Jersey is something similar. Now, having said all that, it doesn't matter much once the water crosses the base insulator. So you are going to be limited again by the local situation.
So one thing to be aware of when you are building a site is you do want to check into what the floodplain situation looks like and how likely that site is to flood. In fact, I've got one out here in California that the site is built on stilts. I mean, it's built up on piers, tower included. And the first time I saw that was, in fact, at an AM down south of Minneapolis. And I thought, interesting. But it makes perfect sense. If you know it's going to flood, plan for it when you build the site,
Believe it or not, I have a site like that here in Colorado, of all places. And because it was it's a translator that covers Boulder for and for one of our stations, and it's only used to be an AM station that we sold off. It used to be paired with one of our FMs, but anyway, that station is the transmitter building's built on stilts, maybe about 10 feet up, and the base insulator is a good 10, 12 feet off the ground too, for the same reason, because it is in a floodplain. So I believe it's Coal Creek is that body of water, but yeah, same thing. So people don't think Colorado flooding, but yes, it can happen in the valleys, and also being that that's right on the plains, just where the mountains meet the plains, but it is on the plains. So there you go.
Right. So well, and exactly, and you also get the flash floods where the water runs off so quickly.
Yes, being close to the mountains, absolutely.
Yeah. So to go along with that, the other thing that you want to make sure is that you actually do have a way to access the site under those conditions. Maybe the site I was talking about Yeah, the site I was talking about south of Minneapolis actually had a rubber dinghy that they would use to paddle out to the site. It's kind of hilarious, actually. But other sites, have gone with things like the Argo, which is an amphibious vehicle that can be equipped with outboard motor or tracks or whatever, and that works really well for that because it floats. So if it gets muddy, you can get in there. If it starts getting flooded, you can still get in there if you absolutely have to.
Yep.
So.
Yep. Absolutely, Shane. Like I said, I actually personally own a kayak. If I ever need to, I can break that out and just do some kayaking. I had that from my time when I used to be on the coast. I actually worked in Delaware and Maryland for a while in the coastal area years ago. So that's when I got that. So, again, so I do have some experience of coastal stuff, but but I have been up in the mountains for the past 8-9 years. So there you go. Experience it all, I think. I shouldn't say that because you never experience it all in this business,
About the time something surprises you.
On the topic of experiencing it all, Douglas Datweiler's asked about earthquakes. And I know, like our gear, seismic tethering is part of the gear. Like you've got the ability to bolt them to the floor. But Shane, you're now moved from the wild to Wyoming to earthquake country. What experience do you have with tethering and hardening sites for earthquakes?
I am. I'm out here in California, Quakia now. So yeah, you do have to take that into consideration when you're building sites in earthquake zones. And normally what you would want to do is just consult the local authorities having jurisdiction just to see what the requirements are for that site. I mean, it may be as simple as, oh, hey, you've got to bolt the rack to the floor, which is, in my mind, probably a good idea anyway. I've done that at a lot of sites, even not in earthquake zones. Everything to, oh, you've actually got to secure this to a wall or to the ceiling or something, or put it on some kind of, securement so that it can move about a little bit, but not, like shimmy across the floor. So yeah, consult the local authorities having jurisdiction on that one, and generally they'll be able to guide you in the right direction. Even if they're not familiar with broadcast plants, they are familiar with industrial installations, and they know, what it takes to keep things relatively safe in an earthquake zone.
Right.
Yes,
And,
I just want to add one thing that
Utah in this case. Yeah, go ahead, Jason. Sorry.
One thing I would just want to add to that too is it's, believe it or not just a California thing. In the middle of the U.S., like Illinois, Missouri area, you have the New Madrid zone, but also years ago when I worked in Western New York, I learned something quite interesting. Apparently, the St. Lawrence Seaway is actually over a fault, and in the past, in maybe 100, 150 years ago, has actually created some pretty sizable earthquakes. So I can't remember because the county, the local municipality where I was working up there actually had a seismic code. I'm like, when I first got there, I'm like, why does, a town, little small city in upstate New York have a seismic code? Well, then somebody explained to me the whole thing about bad earthquake in Montreal and being close enough that it's an issue. So also I guess it'll probably be, cool back in Ontario as well, some people in that southern section on the Canadian side of things. So right. It is a good idea to build for it. And then also too, I'll never forget when I was working in for the first time down in Maryland. I was worried. I was asking my supervisor, okay, what's the seismic code here? And he was like, "What seismic code?" I'm like, "Okay." And I was explaining it to him. When I decided, he said, "Oh, it's a good idea. Tie the racks up." And what happened? About 10 years ago, they had that earthquake. So go figure. In a place where they never had one before.
Well,
so
excellent.
I'm just saying.
Douglas was talking about Utah. I know Oklahoma, for example, has dozens of magnitude 2 and 3 earthquakes in the average year. So it's definitely not that uncommon.
Yep, and even my native state of Pennsylvania, we had, we got like magnitude 3. Maybe you feel it a little bit, but there is activity there people don't realize.
Right.
Exactly. So, it may or may not be enough to feel it, but over the years, maybe something will shake something loose. So again, it's something to pay attention to. So go ahead.
Now we get into my favorite topic, safety. And I left, so a little backstory here. When I built this slideshow, PowerPoint, Microsoft, whoever decided to make suggestions for the layout. And so you see the icon they came up with for PPE. I think they may have done a little bit of literal translation there. So anyway, first aid kit. So do you guys both have first aid kits at all your sites?
As many as possible. Yeah, it's highly, highly, highly recommended. I don't know that it's been like a company-wide mandate at this point, but if it's not, it will be. It should be. And we do recommend that there be first aid kits at all of our sites, and the field engineers as well. I mean, they definitely are encouraged to stock both their truck and their sites with appropriate first aid provisions.
Yes, most of my sites, at least in Denver, most of them have some sort of form of first aid kit, as well as, of course, our shop has actually a really nice one, and I carry a whole bunch of first aid supplies with me as well. In my truck, which always goes with me, because if I'm working, say, maybe at a shared translator site, something happens, hey, I want to have a first aid kit. So it's just like my tools. I like having my tools with me. I have a first aid box sitting with my tools.
Yeah, well, same with my laptop case. I mean, I'm a lowly sales guy now for the most part, and I mean, I've always got Band-Aids and various first aid things. I'm not going to splint a broken arm with what's in my laptop. Well, maybe, but probably not. However, yeah, the minor cuts and injuries that we all seem to come across day to day.
Yeah, we all know it's not a project until you've made a minor blood sacrifice, right?
Absolutely.
Now, what about contact lists? I mean, site management, of course, when you're on a rented site, security, whether it's private security or local police forces, sheriffs, et cetera. How do you maintain that sort of thing?
Yes, we actually have a site database that contains all of that information for each of the sites, and we encourage the field engineers to keep that up to date as they go to sites. If they find out about changes, there's also our, the leasing department that should be on top of that as well. If they find out about contact changes, like a new landlord or new owner of a site, we just try to keep the database up to date so everybody stays in the loop on that. But yeah, it's really important to have some mechanism for tracking that. Some field engineers print all that information out, keep it with them in a paper form as they travel around, which is great. The only problem with paper is that it does tend to get out of date rather quickly. So yeah, there are a number of ways to accomplish it, but definitely, you definitely want to have that contact information. I mean, one of the big problems for me was always site codes. How do I access a site?
Yes.
I had a private like Google Doc that I would keep all of that stuff in, which in hindsight probably is not. I mean, it's in my own private account. It's probably not the most secure thing in the world. I would encourage now to use something more like a password manager or something. You can store all kinds of things in those, including site codes, and they're nice and secure. And,
There's a good biometric one for Android called Password Keeper that I tend to use, but I find the easiest answer is just to make all your passwords 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. And if I may add something here. Yeah, if I may add a couple of things here. First off, I'm going to say iHeart, they have their own internal system similar to what Shane was talking about at EMF. Plus, the other thing that I use is, and I admit I'm probably addicted to this program called Evernote. And what I do is we have one for our department that we maintain where we share site stuff, and I have my own personal one, where I can put my own personal notes and stuff. And what I do is for passwords, actually, both personal and private, is I will give a instead of writing a password, I will give a hint that only makes sense to me. And to maybe make this clearer, if you don't mind, I'll give you an example of this. Back in college, I used to use, and I don't do this anymore, so I don't mind sharing this. For my password for my college, email account, I used to use state capital spelled backwards. So, for example, okay, let's say it was, I don't know, if it was something like, say, I don't know, like I was up to Albany, I did the state capitals in alphabetical order, so I would write New York, and I would just keep New York written on my notebook. So what would people think of that, right? But that was my password, but I knew the capital New York was Albany spelled backwards. Went down the list. I think I got up to, I like to say I got up to Minnesota. I think it was like St. Paul backwards.
Yep.
As far as I got when I was doing that, it was towards the end of my college career. But that is how I used to do passwords. So again, today, for example, if my again, something to me, okay, maybe I want to be more secure. Okay, probably Shane, because he's from there, might understand this. I'll write, instead of maybe Minnesota, maybe I'll just write Minneapolis down or something like that. MLPS, and I'll realize, wait a minute, I'm using the state capital, so my password is St. Paul backwards.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Or Bemidji, so people start thinking Paul Bunyan instead of.
There you go. I'm not as familiar with that part of the world, but I'm just saying that was the last one I happened to get to, so that stands out in my mind. So there you go.
Yeah. So hints are great, but yeah, hints are great. The other thing that I've found that's really helpful in terms of making secure passwords for things, use passphrases. So think of a phrase that you'll easily remember, and then take the first letter of each word in that phrase. I mean, mix up the caps, maybe throw a special symbol in there if you want to. You don't have to, but those are by far some of the most secure passwords you can ever come up with, and the easiest to remember, quite honestly. So.
Yeah.
Very good. Now, going back to the first aid real quick, one question we got was what recommended first aid certifications, and I'll pick an example using Nautel as a basis. The folks that work in our test room are all certified to the point of at least using the defibrillators, having CPR training. Most of them have mandatory standard first aid. We do have also full, almost paramedic certified folks on staff too, depending on what part of the facility. So what do you guys recommend for that? Like, I mean, at the very minimum, what first aid training should you have?
Well, I mean, the very basics, of course. I mean, there are a number of resources out there that'll just teach basic first aid, you know. So that's a good place to start. But I mean, it's really going to depend on your company policies as well. Some companies have formal policies for this, and we actually do as well. We have, I mean, internally at headquarters, we have a team that is designated the medical emergency response team. That's what they do. They are trained to respond to those medical emergencies. So they typically have a lot more training in that area than we would individually. And then we have appropriate training programs for field, for field personnel as well, to kind of guide them in terms of what they need to know in terms of keeping safe and in terms of what to do in case there is some kind of injury that needs to be addressed. So. Good
point. Now, one of the other points that came up, and fair note, is you guys both work for some of the larger companies, but you do also both have small operation experience. So, like corporate training, of course, is one thing, but what's something that the small market engineer could do in this line of work that to help him keep doing his job safer, without breaking the bank, so to speak?
I would say just check with resources like the Red Cross. I mean, there are a lot of really great, just basic first aid courses that you can get in, and it's really up to you and your own situation in terms of how elaborate you get and how in-depth you get. Not everybody's going to have or need to know how to use a personal defibrillator, for instance, or an automatic, AED, automatic defibrillator. But you at the very least need to know how to bandage a wound, kind of assess it, see how severe it is. Okay, is this something I actually am going to need really urgent medical assistance for right now? Do I need to call 911 or whatever, or hit the? In our case, we have these little spots where you can hit the button and go, okay, send me help. I need help like now. So, but yeah, things like the Red Cross are a great place to start for that.
Yep, and I mean St. John Ambulance is another good resource up here. Anyway, I'm not sure what you've got down in your neck of the woods for that, but definitely along those lines, and just the basics. I know when I was taking first aid in Army cadets many years ago, breathing, bleeding, and bones were the priorities. And that's how you prioritized everything. Because if you're not breathing, it doesn't matter if you're bleeding, so to speak. But so yeah, a lot of it's just basic self-education, and it is available, a lot of it online or from local organizations at very low cost. Now, one other thing. Sorry, go ahead. And I see Jason's point on here too, but you go ahead with yours first.
I was going to say another great resource. If you really want to go to that length, another great resource may be getting some first responder training.
Yeah, that does go quite a ways above, but yeah, I mean, absolutely, volunteer fire departments are a great way.
I know a number of engineers who are in fact, involved in their volunteer fire departments, and they are in fact trained first responders. So, I mean, if that's something that you feel is necessary or appropriate in your case, then by all means, it's certainly not out of the realm of possibility.
Right.
I agree with you, Shane. Go ahead. Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I agree with you. And basically, even if you say don't have or don't have the time to do the training, I'm sure we all know people. I mean, I have people, both friends and family members, that are both EMTs, firefighters at various levels, and I actually talk to them. I actually ask them for advice. A, as a layperson, what can I do in this situation? And what sort of, and also the other thing is, if you have periodic fire inspections in your area. Speaking of fire safety, I want to dovetail into this. Like we do here in Colorado, when I have the fire departments come for inspections, I actually do pre-plans with them and go over hazards of the site. And not only do I let them tell me, the basic stuff like, okay, now that we're quote unquote to code, what can I do above and beyond code to make my site safer, to make myself safer? And and I'll take my notebook out and I'll write down the list of things to either research or do and implement them. I mean, that's another way to, talk about this. Go ahead, Jeff.
Absolutely. Well,
I was going to
and
say, that's one of the good points too, coming back to site hardening, for example, fire safety, establishing clear zones around the facility.
yeah, and I was just going to mention that, Jeff, as well. I mean, some of these measures don't have to cost, I mean, they cost little or nothing. I mean, things like you got a bunch of cardboard and boxes and whatever, basically kindling piled up, in the worst place possible, which is, near your electrical panels or near your transmitters. Get that stuff out of there. Clean it up.
You mean Alex's garage?
Well, I wasn't going to say it.
Well, see, he's attending, so we'll see if he's listening if I get the message later. But for the folks that don't know, a mutual friend of ours had posted a picture of cleaning out his garage recently, and it was a pure mountain of cardboard.
Yeah, wow. I'm not one to talk right now, unfortunately, having just moved to a new place. So,
well, I'm just starting to move, so I'm not talking either. I mean, I'm sitting in my living room with like a couple dog cages out, and as well as the living room, the dining room tables now pushed into a corner so we can pack easier. So I understand. One more thing I might add about the cardboard boxes. When cleaning them out, if you happen to have a generator room, that's not the place to put those. I'm just saying.
No.
You get fires.
Yeah, and definitely, if
and
you're
not only
if there are other accelerants or flammable materials, you'll definitely want to deal with those as well and make sure that if they need to be on site, that they're properly stored, or if they don't need to be on site, they're old and just kind of abandoned there, then get rid of them appropriately. Find the right resource in your community to actually dispose of them properly.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you see too many transmitter sites that become sort of, I guess, storage facilities, for lack of a better term. And not only does it become a trip and fall hazard or a fire hazard, but it just, in general, makes it harder to work there.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Touching on PPE, personal protective equipment, and Jason, you'll notice the third item on that list is the one you'd mentioned earlier. So great minds think alike, so to speak.
Yes.
How about safety shoes? You all know I beat the drum on it. What's your position on them?
Absolutely. Yeah, if you're going to be at a site, you're going to be out in the field, you want to protect your feet. And yeah, EH rated, most definitely. That can actually save your life. It's really important. I mean, the one time you touch something that's energized that you don't realize is energized, I mean, yeah, it only takes once. So, and that goes to your first topic as well, arc flash, if appropriate. Hopefully most of us, well, some of us are in environments where we deal with that, but a lot of times, hopefully that would be something you'd be handing off to an electrician and having them deal with. But yeah, I mean, every situation is different.
So the general rule of thumb, for what it's worth, on arc flash is 125 kVA. So if you've got a 480 volt entrance with a, trying to do math in my head is never a good idea, but a 300 amp breaker on it, you're getting into the range.
Yep.
So just as one example.
Yep, and if you have to throw one of those and don't have the safety equipment, just honestly, simply just don't do it with the door open. Close the door, so to speak, on the disconnect, because this was designed for it, so you can safely run it. Don't switch those with them open, basically.
And if you've ever worked with any of the old engineers, they always stood beside it, not in front of it when they were switching it on or off.
That's true.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Just kind of like played on button with the broomstick, is that?
That's a whole different thing, because those big bangs are really, really scary, even if they're not all that dangerous.
Yes.
So, yeah, someday I'll tell you
Definitely.
about the first time I was in a building when an MW50 got turned on for the first time in
Oh,
6 months. So now the comfort, and I just grabbed, and this 5gallonideas.com website, if you're into prepping or doing stuff for yourself, this is just a fun website for finding different ideas. And there are all kinds of them on the internet. I mean, I searched 5-gallon bucket survival kit or something like that. So, and some of the things I had were kind of frightening, more in the concept of what I was seeing than anything else. But so, what are the kind of things you would put in a comfort kit for? I mean, I know one thing obviously comes to mind, but what would you guys use?
yeah, definitely. The toiletries are important, which I'm sure is what you were getting at. But yeah, I mean, just you probably want some non-perishable food in there for one, just to make sure that you've got something at the site that you can use to kind of sustain yourself. I don't know that this necessarily, maybe this is separate from your comfort kit, but definitely water as well. Keep water on site. Ideally, your site's not going to be in a situation where it gets below freezing and the water will freeze, but there are solutions to that as well. Yeah, just things like towels, things like stuff to clean your hands, things to yeah, I think for instance, I mean the kit that they show here is actually a pretty good start, honestly. Jason,
Yeah.
what do you think? You out there in the mountains, you've
Yes. Sorry, Shane, you broke up for a little bit there. What do you say about the mountains?
I said, what do you think with your experience out there in the mountains? I
Oh
know
yeah, I
what.
think my experience. Yeah, yes, of course, my experience in mountains. Yes, a couple of things that I keep in my, at least in my truck anyway, because I figured I basically think of my truck as not only mode of transportation, but also kind of as my mobile workshop slash emergency, place to stay, if I need to. So anyway, so some of the things I keep with me, I actually keep a sleeping bag, and also I have an old pillow, and it's an older pillowcase, and I just keep it in a plastic bag to keep everything clean, just for comfort purposes if you have to sleep somewhere, either in the truck or at a site. And always have paper towels with me. Honestly, even though it may not be the most comfortable things for your hands, turns out denatured alcohol, besides for being good for cleaning transmitters, if you need to make your hands, just get your hands clean of any pathogens, it does work. It'll dry out your hands, but if you absolutely have to, you can use it. I admit I've done it multiple
Yeah.
times. And of course, and for those of us that are a little more sensitive, maybe you keep some wet wipes or just some standard hand sanitizer as well.
Well, or the
So
cool thing, I don't know if you can see it on my webcam, but
uh
this is a sanitizer pen that was given out
oh,
at one of the
nice.
trade shows I was at. So
Oh,
it's
that's cool.
yeah, I mean it's really convenient. It's all, oh, there it is. Oops, all coming apart now,
Nice.
but yeah, it does exactly what you need it to do when you're stuck on the side of a hill.
And of course, denatured alcohol, of course, you never want to ingest it. But the other nice thing about it is you have a little sterno. You can actually, if you know how to do this properly, and of course, do your research first, you can actually use it as fuel for various types of burners for heating up stuff. Like if you want to have something hot somewhere, like when you're camping or whatever. So
Yep.
Right.
actually, it's actually one of my favorite things to keep with me is denatured alcohol.
Right.
Besides, for
Well,
of course, awesome for cleaning transmitters. Go ahead.
I'm going to say another thing we got to comment on, and I'll mention too that the reason I picked this photo when I put this together was because of the 5-gallon bucket. It gives you a convenient place to
Uh-huh.
store everything that is relatively rodent proof. So if you do have
Hmm.
things like food items in there,
Hmm.
then you don't have to worry as much about them getting in
Yes.
there.
Nice.
One other comment somebody had made was it's also a good idea to have a pair of wool socks and a dry shirt in there,
I was
especially if
just
you're
Yep.
Yeah, I
cold
was just going
climbing.
to bring
Yeah,
that up actually. One thing that I found really important to keep with me is a spare change of clothes. And of course, if you can, just if you've got any medications or anything, keep a small handful of that on hand as well. Just you never know when you're going to be out in the field for an extra night or two. It
right.
happens. I mean,
Yep.
in
Yep.
case of Wyoming, the roads closed, the freeways closed, and
Hmm.
you literally cannot get there from here. So
Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, for those of us that travel for a living, it's pretty uncommon to have pretty common to have a change of clothes and a couple of days worth of medication in your carry-on, your laptop case. So this is a similar extension. It just goes in your tool bag to have it
Yep.
there. One other note: if you are carrying a change of clothes, keep them in a Ziploc bag or some kind of plastic bag where they will stay dry if you do happen to end up underwater for whatever reason.
Yeah, I actually I have an old suitcase that I just keep in the truck, and I always keep a couple changes of clothes, and I keep some headache pills if I need them. Figured if I'm stuck somewhere, probably have a headache, things like that.
Yep.
So that's it's always good. And then the one other thing I want to say about containers, another good idea is for keeping stuff, say such as silverware or even smaller non-perishable food items. If you don't want to do a single 50-gallon bucket, get a couple of, believe it or not, ammo cases, because they'll keep just about anything dry. And I actually use them for I use them for I have silverware that I actually keep, I'll wash it, and I'll actually keep in the there's little plastic containers you can get for a portable toothbrush, and I'll actually keep so I can actually have real silverware when I'm eating, have a little comfort, right? And then when I'm done, take it home, wash it, put it back in the truck. I have a set that I keep just for the truck like that. So that's another thing that helps me. And
Well,
of course,
and it's funny because some days it's just the smallest things that make all the difference.
Yep. And the other thing, go ahead. Sorry. And the other thing is, I just want to add too is for anybody that's on, say, any sort of special diet, either for health reasons or just, in my case, I wanted to drop a ton of weight, which I did. My non-perishable food, I actually swapped out what was in my emergency supply. So I actually have a bunch of canned fruits, vegetables, and lean proteins that I carry with me in cans, and as well as pouches of either tuna or salmon, because those are actually great because they don't take up a lot of space. You can put them in an ammo case. You can even, if you have to, you can even sneak a couple in the space between your center console and your seat in your car if you had to. You don't have a lot of room.
Yep.
Jason,
Just
that's
for
an excellent.
Go ahead.
Jason, that's an excellent point. I would do exactly the same thing. Those little pouches of tuna or whatever, anything that's kind of a non-perishable protein is great to keep on hand. And of course, like you said, silverware, napkins especially. I always find that whenever I need a napkin in my truck, I can't find them. And when I don't, I have a boatload of them. So
Yep. Yeah, of course. And the other thing about that is, a worst case scenario, I just find keeping a couple rolls of paper towels. Actually, paper towels can take the place of a lot of things.
Yeah.
And although I always carry a roll of toilet paper too, but in case you run out of toilet paper, if you have to, all I'm gonna say is it works. How's that?
It beats leaves. Let's go there.
Yes.
Now, one other question. So what credentials do you carry in the event of, like with the local restrictions on movement that some of us just went through? I know CISA in the U.S. had issued a access letter for broadcasters as essential services. But what kind of credentials do you normally carry?
Right. I always carry, at the very least, I carry some of my business cards. I carry my company badges as well, just to identify me. And I actually have two badges. One of them is the access badge and the ID badge for the building itself, for headquarters, which oddly enough doesn't have my much information on it, just my picture. But there's a second badge that I have that actually designates, hey, I'm part of the engineering team, I'm part of emergency responding and all that fun stuff. So I carry both of those with me. I also carry a binder that has the CISA letters and all of that fun stuff. And our company actually made up letters for each engineer as well. So I carry that along with me. The more the better, basically. And of course, your typical ID, your government issued ID as well. So yeah.
Yes, I carry very similar credentials with me. Of course, my business cards, of course, my driver's license. I have a company ID, as well as a couple of letters from the company and from FEMA, saying that I'm considered a critical person with involved in critical infrastructure. They say they say to the law enforcement or other officials during times of emergency, please allow this person to pass for the purpose of maintaining communications with the general public, like that type of stuff.
Exactly.
So that actually just sits in the truck with me. So as soon as I drive the truck, everything's with me.
So one important,
some of that can be coordinated with like local sheriff's departments or things like that,
Yes.
just to have the signature on it before you walk out the door.
Yep.
Right. And one important point to remember is you don't, if they're not going to let you pass for whatever reason, don't push the issue. Don't be belligerent. Don't be stubborn or anything like that. Just say okay, and you know, turn around. It's not. I mean, it's not worth your. You know, it's not worth getting getting arrested or getting having your life in jeopardy or anything like that. If the officials say, hey, we can't allow you to pass, then just don't.
Right. Understood. Now,
makes sense. Also, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead, oh, go.
Yeah, the other thing I think is going to add to all that stuff is talking with emergency. This actually happened to me in my past. For emergency issues is it may make sense to get to know maybe the local sheriff pretty well. And I actually are emergency coordinators. And years ago when I was in Western New York, I actually had the opportunity to do that. And I got on kind of, I got friendly with the actually the emergency guy that ran the emergency coordination for the county and the sheriff, and they knew me on a first name basis. And I was actually on a list of people specifically allowed to travel during states of emergency, for the purpose, because they knew I had to do the radio station. Not only that,
Right.
but they even offered, hey, if your truck breaks down, give us a call. We'll get you wherever you need to go. We have a big SUV. We'll take you. I never had to use it, but kind of nice to know.
It does make a difference.
Those,
Now,
yeah,
I
those
do
relationships.
see a hand being raised here, so I am going to just take a quick scroll down. There it is, Mike Glazer. Just hang on, I'm going to see if we can. Okay, Mike, you are muted. There you go. So what did you have?
No, I was just going to offer that I was with the auxiliary police and the police department, the auxiliary, and the volunteer fire department, fire police. And in the past, I've used those credentials, and they seem to carry some weight. A couple of times I've ventured into New York City over the past week or so, and I've had some dirty looks. You kind of explain what you're doing there, and they go, oh, well, all right, go ahead. I didn't see you go by. And out here on Long Island, where they're doing some in the eastern part of New York, where they've got some crazy restrictions over the past few months. I've had a couple of issues where I was stopped, and I even got an amber light for the dashboard, so I could look a little bit more official than some guy just driving with a box of tools in the back. It's
Right.
really crazy. It's really crazy.
No, well, thanks very much. That's useful input.
Point.
I'm going to skip ahead a notch or two. Where is one of the shows that my wife and I like to watch. One of the taglines is always "We're running out of time," but we are coming up on the hour. If anybody else has got any thoughts, comments, or ideas, by all means, feel free to email it to me. I'd be more than happy to write a tips article on stuff like this. This is something that I think is important to everybody, and we've all got different ideas and ways of approaching stuff like this. We also have some resources where you can find some information, the YouTube channel, the Waves newsletter, as I mentioned, the tips articles I put in there, and a bunch of people smarter than me putting in lots of other stuff too. And then this webinar and all of our webinars are archived, so you can go through and look at those at your convenience, if you will. On that note, I do want to take a moment to thank Shane and Jason very much. I know especially with rehearsals and stuff, it's pretty early in the morning for you guys, being quite a bit west of here. So I want to thank you guys very much for coming along.
Thanks for having me, Jeff. Appreciate it.
And on that note, folks, again, thank you for your time, and have a very, very wonderful rest of your week.